With WWE wanting to bring back Steve Austin for Mania and Ric Flair called out for trying to get hired by AEW, this is Wrestling Hub. My name is Jon and you're watching the Wrestling Report for December 20th. Before we get into the rest of the video, make sure you subscribe to Wrestling Hub and turn on all notifications to stay up to date with everything in the world of pro wrestling. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram at WrestlingHubOfficial and also follow us on Twitter at Wrestling_Hub. On SmackDown, Roman Reigns severed ties with Paul Heyman as he fired his special counsel. With Reigns set to face Brock Lesnar at Day 1, Jim Cornette took to his podcast to talk about Heyman being relieved of his duties by Roman. Roman Reigns hugs Paul Heyman and puts his arms around him. He takes the microphone and says, "I love you. Thank you for 40 years of service to my family. You're fired." Paul is shocked. Reigns turns around to walk off and then turns back around and runs and hits the Superman punch and Paul goes down, but his feet didn't leave the ground. That was the lowest altitude ever on a bump, but he went down and he stayed there and the people boo. And then Reigns has the Usos bring chairs in and they're gonna concerto Paul. And not only is that a little extreme, but also the size of Paul's head. I was worried about the chairs. Honestly, this was so good. I wish they hadn't gone for the concerto thing because that's a bit much. But boom, before they can do it, and here comes Brock Lesnar. Brock meets the Usos on the ground and he kicks the crap out of the Usos. And then he slides in and Reigns takes the chair to him, but he said screw it, just stands up under him and gives him an F5. Boom, and then another. Then there is Paul, laying there like yesterday's wash, and Brock Lesnar's fired up in the ring. That was an angle. I mean, that's wrestling. While he is currently leading the Hardy family office stable with groups like Private Party as well as the Butcher and the Blade, Matt Hardy talked to Essentially Sports about his future after his in-ring career. "Whenever I finish my in-ring career, which obviously I have a lot less years left than I do behind me, but I would definitely see myself being a producer or someone involved in the creative process. At the end of the day, pro wrestling is my passion. I want to wrestle in the ring as long as I can, as long as my body will physically let me. Once that is said and done, I can still be involved and contribute by being a producer, and you're still able to live out your passion to some degree." In that same interview, Matt Hardy talked about how approachable AEW President Tony Khan is compared to WWE Chairman Vince McMahon. "I think AEW is very special because the mentality AEW uses, starting from Tony Khan all the way down, is really just come in, do your job, work hard, be part of the team, and let's make this product as good as possible. They don't really try and force people into a hierarchy. They don't try and reign by fear, and everyone is allowed to feel comfortable. If you have an issue, you can talk to anyone. Tony Khan is so accessible. If you need to address Tony Khan, then you can speak to him. Where at WWE, it's quite the opposite with Vince. Vince is very hard to be able to speak with, and Tony, I just feel like Tony has the current mindset of the wrestling fan in 2021, so he can kind of make that come alive through his wrestlers and the way he puts together and book shows. It's just a comfortable family environment where everyone feels like if you need to speak out, if you need to address something, you can. Everyone is comfortable in AEW, and it really does feel like a really big family. They're both ridiculously hard workers. There's no doubt about that. Vince works his ass off. No one can ever take that away from him. Tony does as well. And on top of also running AEW, Tony has so many other responsibilities. He has stuff to do with the NFL's Jacksonville Jaguars. He has Fulham, the football team over in the UK. He has a lot of stuff going on, but he is so passionate about pro wrestling, and you can tell. At his core, he's a pro wrestling fan. I think that translates helping him be more passionate as a boss or as a booker, and I feel that it allows him to do an even better job. I feel like he's very thorough, and he also really respects the AEW wrestling fans, and he does everything he can to not insult their intelligence. If they're going to invest their time in watching weeks of a story, he's going to make sure to reward them by giving them a big payoff to the story as well. Despite many thinking we could see the Nature Boy in AEW after he left WWE, Ric Flair would be surrounded by controversy due to the Plane Ride from Hell documentary. Not only that, Flair has given opinions on his podcast that fans don't appreciate, like him saying Bryan Danielson's in-ring skills are okay. Now, Jim Cornette has addressed those comments, saying this on his podcast. He might want to make Triple H happy, because they are friends, or used to be friends, is why he would say that about Bryan Danielson. Why would someone like Ric Flair, that in any other lifetime would not wipe his feet on Kenny Omega after what he has done? And suddenly, it is because of his match with the prospective son-in-law, where he's hoping that Kenny Omega would get him into AEW because he's the EVP despite the bad publicity? Why would you make such an outrageous statement when people themselves can see that Danielson is so many levels ahead of Omega? During his time in WWE, Jon Moxley was supposed to debut on the main roster in a feud against Mick Foley, but this was never seen. On Busted Open Radio, Foley talked about his rivalry with Moxley in WWE, saying the angle with Moxley, it required me to go to some dark places. The problem was I couldn't get out of them. It wasn't like I would go cut the Kane Dewey promo in the basement of Paulie's cameraman while his mom was doing the ironing and my wife and 2 kids are at a park 2 blocks away, and I would come out of these fresh as a daisy and I'm ready to go. When I would get into the storyline, I couldn't get out. It was like this cloud. I don't want to be overly dramatic, but it was around me all the time and it was affecting me, especially when I saw Moxley writing about my children. So I come up to him at a TV taping with Dusty. I asked Dusty if he would come up with me, just so I could talk to him. I said, hey man, whatever you do, please stop mentioning my children. Many are aware of the backstage shenanigans that have taken place in pro wrestling. With Steel City Con, JBL mentioned how The Undertaker once pranked Big Show. We were in Europe and I was in the ring and somebody, I'm not going to say who, it could have been his brother. He had an idea. When Big Show came out, they would stop his music and play Shrek's theme music. So I'm in the ring for a triple threat match with Kurt Angle and Kurt's not in on it. The dead man was by the music booth arranging it, and when Big Show hears the music he turns around and his face is red. It's like a giant red tomato, like a 540-pound red tomato. And Kurt Angle goes, what is that? I go, Shrek's theme music. And he goes, oh my god, he's going to kill us. Listen, I did it. I'm going to take the blame for it. He goes, thank God. Big Show gets in the ring and I say, I swear to God, Kurt Angle did it and I had nothing to do with it. Seen as one of the biggest stars in pro wrestling, Stone Cold Steve Austin could be getting ready to make a comeback. According to WrestleVotes, talked to a few different sources this weekend and heard the same thing. WWE is very interested in having Steve Austin as a part of WrestleMania this year in Dallas. Not in a wrestling role, but a meaningful part of the event outside of just appearing, up to creative at this point. For the past few months, fans have been turning on Cody, with them calling him names and even throwing his weight belt back at him. On Keeping It 100, Disco Inferno criticized Rhodes for forcing himself on fans as a babyface. Conan and I believe that he does come across kind of on TV as off-putting, and the fact that he is essentially trying to force himself as a babyface on everybody's throat is genuinely off-putting to the fans. I think we would all agree that Cody maybe takes himself too seriously, but he really should be a heel right now. Liv Morgan has been involved in a feud with Becky Lynch as she recently challenged her for the Raw Women's title earlier this month in the main event. With Pro Seaman Max, Morgan talked about that match, saying it felt like a full circle moment. I was completely aware. It made it feel so much more special for me, you know? Because I remember watching that match. I remember 17 years ago watching on my bed watching Trish versus Lita for the Raw Women's Championship. I was such a huge fan of Lita, and she won. And I will never forget that match. It was just like a pinch me moment. It was incredible. I just was hoping it would be the main event, and then I found out a couple of hours into the day that we were going to the main event because originally we weren't. We weren't going to main event, and then that got switched, and so it was just so special. They will face off once again at the Day 1 pay-per-view, as it'll be interesting to see if Morgan can beat Lynch for the title this time. In an instant classic on Dynamite Winter is Coming, Bryan Danielson took on Hangman Page for the AEW World title, which would end in a draw after 60 minutes. On his podcast, Jim Cornette spoke about this match and criticized the former AEW champ for being incapable of having a bout like this. So Page is selling like a champ, and Danielson is a heel, and this thing is building still at 40 minutes in and keeps on building. This is what Kenny Omega is not capable of whatsoever. An athletic contest with professional wrestling and not phony video game BS and a complete and utter lack of logic. This is exactly why Omega is not the best wrestler in the world, never will be, never has been, and that is why wrestlers such as Danielson have a claim to be in that conversation. He is doing what Kenny Omega has not been able to do in 2 years. With Kenny Omega taking time off from wrestling to have surgeries and heal from injuries, fans are sure to be excited when he makes his return. After losing to Charlotte Flair and having her doll destroyed at Extreme Rules, Alexa Bliss has been absent from programming. While she has hinted at a return, former WWE writer Vince Russo told Dr. Featherstone that WWE's booking of Bliss has taken a toll on her credibility. The unfortunate thing is WWE, they just put their talent in bad spots. This is because what will happen is you are going to lose faith with the fans. Alexa Bliss had the talk show, then she had the thing with Nikki Cross, then she had the thing with Bray Wyatt. Now she will return and there is no telling what is planned for her, and that's the problem. After Sammy Guevara announced that he and his fiancée had split, many fans began to suggest that Tay Conti was dating Sammy, as both AEW stars would end up trending on Twitter. This would cause Conti to deactivate her account, with a statement being released on her behalf. This is Tay's management team writing to let you know Tay is doing good, but will be stepping away from social media for a couple days. In the meantime, we will be posting on Tay's behalf throughout the week. This includes normal posts, as well as some sponsored posts that we have already recorded earlier in the month that must be posted this week. Sammy had responded to this backlash, letting it be known that his previous relationship came to an end in October and that no one else had anything to do with it. And this was your pro wrestling news update. I hope you're all having a great day. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later.